The administration is standing behind NASA's top man, who says President Obama wants the space agency's top priority to be Muslim outreach. Senior correspondent Brian Wilson reports it is just the latest hurdle for a troubled space program.
And liftoff of Discovery with a...
NASA is an agency facing tough times. When the final 2 shuttle flights are completed early next year, the U.S. will have no capability to launch astronauts into low Earth orbit. We'll just depend on the Russians for that. The Constellation plan to go back to the moon has been scrapped, and the follow-on Obama space plan is both vague and underfunded.
They do not have a clearly articulated goal for the agency. They do not have a clearly articulated program for reaching that goal.
It was in this setting that NASA Administrator Charles Bolden traveled to the Mideast last month on a mission of outreach to the Muslim world. In an interview with Al-Jazeera, he said President Obama asked him to carry out a 3-pronged program at NASA. First, excite young people about math and science. Secondly, expand international relationships.
And third, and perhaps foremost, he wanted me to find a way to reach out to the Muslim world and engage much more with dominantly Muslim nations to help them feel good about their historic contribution to science and engineering.
Over the centuries, Muslims have made and continue to make significant contributions in the disciplines of math, engineering, and yes, even space travel. But former NASA Administrator Michael Griffin called the new Obama approach, quote, deeply flawed. He continued, NASA represents the best of America. Its purpose is not to inspire Muslims or any other cultural entity. But there was more. Bolden also suggested the U.S. was incapable of great accomplishment without international help.
The United States can't do it. China can't do it. No single nation is going to go to a place like Mars alone.
Part of the new approach to space, this administration's new approach to space, is to engage in international partners, and I would obviously that would include the Muslim world.
NASA and the White House offered support for Bolden, adding, the space race began as a global competition, but today it's a global collaboration. Those with longtime connections to NASA were reluctant to pile on, but privately say this was a big mistake by Bolden, one that will further demoralize a space agency facing brain drain and looming layoffs. Bret?
Okay, Brian, thanks. Senior political analyst Brit Hume has followed the space program, of course, throughout his career. He has some thoughts on this story tonight. Good evening, Brit.
Hello, Bret. Making the Muslim world feel good about its contributions to science is far afield from the mission that presidents and Congresses going back to the Kennedy administration had in mind for NASA. But it dovetails nicely with one of the principal missions of Obama foreign policy, which is to make the United States more popular around the world, especially the Muslim world. Thus, the celebrated bowing to the King of Saudi Arabia and the cold shoulder earlier given Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Only today, after the president's original public shunning of Netanyahu went over badly, did the Israeli leader finally receive the treatment normally accorded such a visitor. This president apparently believes that the United States has thrown its weight around too much in the world and that a kinder, gentler attitude combined with the power of his own personality are the way to win friends and influence nations. Machiavelli famously said that while it is nice for a leader to be both loved and feared, it's safer to be feared than loved. Mr. Obama has certainly tried to be loved, but it's not clear that any enemy now fears him. And when it comes to NASA, he might recall another Machiavellian notion. A leader, quote, truly earns honor by completing great feats. That's what the space agency was about, the great feat of reaching and exploring the frontiers of space. Now it seems it's about making other nations feel better about themselves. Bret?
Bret, what about the White House response? Brian mentioned the space race began as a global competition, but today it is a global collaboration.
That's what you say when you're broke. And it tells you something there about why it was that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Mullen said recently that the United States debt and deficits are a major national security issue. In this kind of fiscal situation where we are, there's not a lot of great things we can do in the world in security or much else.
All right, Bret, as always, thanks.
You bet.